Happy Wednesday.
Welcome, welcome. Bernie sure is.
Benny is all over you today.
I know.
Today we're doing a devastating takedown of false narratives about ex-Mormons that continue to be perpetuated.
We're basically like spiritual mythbusters.
Yes.
I was going to say, without all the sex appeal.
Bernie, you ready to start the pod?
Sure.
You can pick him up.
I don't want him to...
He's certainly on one.
I don't mess with him when he's in that mood. I've seen him lunge at a man.
Sometimes I genuinely worry that I'll go blind in one eye because of these guys, because like sometimes they'll launch themselves off my face in my sleep and I'm like,
Ooh.
if I'm gonna go blind, that's probably how it's gonna happen.
Oh yeah, a little cat claw right in the...
A warm welcome to all of you and a piping hot welcome to our patrons and channel members.
If you haven't yet, go join us on Patreon. We're doing another Jack Whalen series, and it is phenomenal. If you want to engage with Mormonism in a light-hearted, narrative, funny, more humor-oriented form, and not so diving into the nitty-gritty.
Did you see that comment someone left that was like, I love this series because I like Mormonism's too heavy, but this was like a fun way to watch you guys, and I love that. Yeah, it is really fun. We're only 4 chapters into Stephanie, so it's a good time to get on board.
A lot of myths about drugs, and...
Yes, we're kind of mythbusters there too. We kind of are professional mythbusters.
In a way, yeah.
When you really think about it.
All right, let's bust some myths.
Every time we do an intro, I'm like, it's not gonna fly, but then I edit and it's like, it's fine, it's good, it turns out good.
Hopefully you've learned by now.
What to expect. So we're gonna get into sort of the individual myths that get spread within Mormonism about ex-Mormons, but I feel like we first need to talk about why these myths exist, the phenomenon as a whole, as it exists within high demand religions and cults, because it is all just pretty textbook. Banksy, you could maybe do the scratching thing at a different time.
I liked how you brought in the high demand religions. We have a ton of viewers who have never dealt with Mormonism at all in any personal way, maybe like knew somebody once or dated somebody once, and this channel has given them some that's why that was weird.
I love how much it's people that dated a Mormon once and they're like, this is all making so much sense. Because imagine dating a Mormon but not really knowing.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
That'd be tough.
That would be. It'd be weird. Mm-hmm. But the amazing thing is that so many people from so many different backgrounds all have this common experience of leaving religion, and it's amazing how much it is just textbook. It's like, oh yeah, these are how organizations use tools of coercion to manipulate people into giving them money, giving them attention, and one of the ways is by literally demonizing people who leave. Mm-hmm. Now, no healthy organization has to assassinate people's character for leaving. You don't hear like, well, actually you do these days on Twitter. Fucking Elon Musk today tweeting about a handicapped employee and
what? Like
publicly blasting them for why they got fired. Yeah, it's a shit show out there.
An individual employee, Elon Musk publicly blasted?
Yes, it has like muscular dystrophy or something. He's like, he claims to be disabled and yet continued to tweet up a storm while not doing any actual work. It's a shit show. Anyway, so yeah, it does happen. But that is not the sign of a healthy organization. Mm-hmm. You should be able to leave any organization with your dignity intact, and that's one of the signs of a cult is that you cannot leave with your dignity intact. According to any cult-like organization, there is no good reason to leave. It can't be just like spiritual differences, creative differences. It's like, no, if you leave this, you are a bad person, or you were deceived by misinformation and ill intent, or all these this slew of myths that we are about to bust.
It's kind of like how with Mormonism in general, believers kind of need to understand the psychology of high control groups rather than the history, because the history tends to not persuade them to think any differently, because obviously we all have the mechanisms in our brains that like protect our deeply held beliefs when we encounter new evidence. And I think it is learning about the psychology behind religious conviction and like high control groups like Mormonism that is more persuasive. I think that was like the piece that really made the difference for us when leaving, It's like there's all the other stuff, but then once there's also that piece.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the patterns, and I would say that like, while the history was my main focus, I was also watching documentaries and being like, oh, all the stuff that I'm seeing play out here is exactly how it plays out in Scientology and in the People's Temple and Nexium and you name it.
Yeah, I could see if you're raised in Mormonism, it would be it's easy to feel like Mormonism is such a unique organization and it just feels so separate from everything. So I think learning that it's not unique in the way that it functions and like the strategies it uses to keep people in is very important.
Yeah, they have to maintain that bubble. And part of that is demonizing people who leave.
Yeah, and I've given this take before, but I really believe it. I think people that are in Mormonism, they're convinced that the reason they're in Mormonism is because of the doctrine. The doctrine's so beautiful. I'm in the church because of the teachings. I haven't found another church that has teachings as good. Never mind the fact that they've been raised in it since birth. So like what they consider to be a good teaching or a good organization is like entirely like based on that conditioning. But Mormons think that they're in the church because of the doctrines.
And the spiritual experiences that they just cannot deny.
But the truth of the matter is they're in it because of the us versus them thinking. Like that's what keeps people in these groups. That's why they are inherent to all high demand religions and cults, to all high control groups, you know, even thinking of a lot of MLMs and stuff like that, so businesses. And such a big piece of being in Mormonism is constantly having it taught to you that it's unsafe, wicked, sinful on the outside. Unsafe is like a big one as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially you see it in more extreme ways with early Mormonism, or like as the FLDS functions now. It's like they literally believe you will die if you leave the group.
Yeah.
Which is perfectly in line with our neurological wiring, so it works out well for them. Like if you just teach people that it's unsafe to leave the group, it's like you've already got millions of years of evolution backing you up in that, so it's like really easy to get people on that one. I just did a quick search of what Jehovah's Witnesses teach about people who leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. And this is just one. I mean, you can find this in every high control group, like it's there, but...
I remembered what I was going to say about how the official name for a cult is a new religious movement, and it's kind of the politically correct term, and it is interesting that those two are sort of synonymous because the newer a religion is, the way more shitty it is. Look at the temple rituals and, you know, anyway.
So here's just a few things that the Jehovah's Witnesses teach about people who leave. I would say the Jehovah's Witnesses are worse than Mormons by about 1 degree worse than Mormons in their shunning of people who leave, because I think they have more intense teachings about how you actually have to cut off your family members.
Well, yeah, I mean...
Which used to be the case in Mormonism, but it's still explicit in Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, the J-Dubs have such a salvation scarcity mindset. Only 144,000 people are going to be saved, so you got to work your ass off to make sure you're going to be one of those. You better be every Saturday morning going, you know, it's not just 2 years of their life. They're like every weekend going out door to door knocking. It seems like hell. That would suck so bad.
And don't they believe that there's not anything you can do to like determine whether you'll be one of the 140? Like people would just kind of, certain people in the church don't even feel like they are part of the 100.
Yeah, there's no way to know. It's got to be such a mindfuck because you're like, oh, assuming that I am means I'm prideful. Therefore, I've got to like do. Yeah. And Mormons have this kind of thing where it's like, I won't aspire to a position that I want and ought to be desired, but my works will just have to prove my heart.
Did you see someone comment on our Patreon that the reason that singer Selena died when she got stabbed was because she was a Jehovah's Witness and didn't get a blood transfusion?
What?
Patreon crossover, join us there. Kind of a dark tie-in.
Damn.
Okay, so here are some quotes from the Jehovah's Witness website. And I think these are all... Basically everything I'm citing comes from the Watchtower, which is their ensign.
Sounds spooky.
Yeah, the Watchtower. No. So Jehovah's Witnesses teach that apostates become proud in heart and something detestable to Jehovah. The Watchtower says some apostates even think they know better than God as regards to his ordering of events in the outworking of his purposes. Two other causes of apostasy are ingratitude and presumption. Hate presumption. This says...
I would never presume to presume anything.
So then, should we listen to apostates, read their literature, or examine their websites on the internet? If we love God and the truth, we will not do so.
I love
very telling.
I love the common usage of the term literature.
I know.
It's like
information.
Yes, the Dostoevsky of anti-Mormon literature.
I just learned who Dostoevsky is. I watched a little those YouTube videos that do like a 10-minute summary of philosophers. Now I'm like, okay.
I read the first 3 chapters of Crime and Punishment, and I was like, this is supposed to be the ultimate treatise on human suffering, and his landlord is bringing him soup. Yeah, right.
I think the reason they use literature, anti-Mormon literature, and Jehovah's Witnesses are saying literature, is because saying information, or what else would you call it?
Media.
Yeah, it sounds worse. Like literature kind of removes it a little bit from what it is, which is just like evidence, information.
Yeah.
Yeah. We should not allow apostates into our homes or even greet them, for such actions would make us sharers in their wicked works. That's where I'd say that's the Jehovah's Witnesses in 2023 being worse than Mormons with shunning coming into it. Although, again, just want to stress that in the past, if you got kicked out of Mormonism under like Brigham Young or something, I mean, you could be killed by the Danites. Or, many others. It did used to be like this for most of Mormonism's history. Like, if you had someone, I'm sure even in like the 70s or the 80s, if you grew up in Utah County and you had a friend or loved one that left, I'm pretty sure you just cut them off.
Yeah, and I think that was, or at least it was kind of expected that, like, okay, well, there's going to be some distance, and that's because they are fallen and sad.
Is it still in the temple questionnaire? Do you affiliate with anyone?
I think so.
Who espouses teachings contrary to the church?
It's like literally everything.
That literally does mean like people who are friends with us wouldn't be worthy of a temple recommend. I'm sure they've like. They're always Yeah,
you can interpret that however you like.
Yeah.
I remember in college being like, well, I'm a registered Republican. Does that count? And the bishop was like, oh, that's fine. And actually, right in line with the teachings of the church. And I was like, I don't know.
Love that you even knew that, though.
Oh, yeah, I was a libertarian.
They also say, apostates may claim to serve God, but reject his representatives, the governing body, his visible organization, the Watchtower
How dare
Society.
you reject the leaders of the church? Don't you know that they speak for God, that whether by his servants or his mouth or the mouth of his servants, it's the same?
Yeah,
they can't lead you astray.
It's very in line with recent messages we've heard from at various like church events from leaders saying that they're doubling down right now on you need to follow us, the leaders. Like, you need to stop saying that you're, doing God your own way, or that he's giving you inspiration that's different from us, because that would never happen. God only talks through the Watchtower.
The church and Christ, synonymous. Which is why Christ just got fined for creating shell companies to hide his assets.
I thought this one was just fun because, Boyd K. Packer said, when you see the bitter apostate, you don't just see, was it the presence of darkness? You see the absence of light. Do not spread disease germs.
What is the difference, oh Boyd?
Do not spread disease germs. And then the Jehovah's Witnesses say, apostates are mentally diseased and they seek to infect others. So just this idea of people who leave will try and infect you with their mental disease, which is right in line with what we know about high control groups, is that disaffected members, people who have left, are the most effective way to get other people out. That's what all cult experts say. Cult deprogramming experts talk about that. So again, just that's why they all have to have narratives about people who leave, and it can never just be, they just didn't really vibe. That's unfortunate because we are really cool, but wish them well. It can never be that, because then the whole thing falls apart, because the whole thing is relying on us versus them psychology and groupthink, and it's about the groupthink.
I don't know. I think someday the evidence will catch up. Someday not being Jehovah's Witness will be listed as a mental illness.
Totally.
Psychology will recognize.
One of the worst. Jehovah's Witnesses, I could go on with this all day. I'll just do a couple more. They say, apostates are like wolves that eat the sheep. Apostates want to... P.S. I have an issue with this because the demonization of wolves as well has led to so much destruction of wolves and ecosystems. And wolves are pack animals like dogs. They have really important emotional bonds with their families. In Idaho, I think they're down to, I can't remember the exact number, but their wolf population is just scarily low, and anyway, it just makes me sad. Apostates want to destroy the faith of the members of the congregation and want them to leave the truth. Apostate literature presents falsehoods by means of smooth talk and counterfeit words.
Okay, smooth talk.
Smooth talk. Tell me more.
That's so funny that they would class printed literature as smooth talk.
So
it's like
smooth.
kind of a mixing metaphors there or something.
As to the effects of a course of apostasy, one immediate result is a loss of joy. The apostate becomes hardened in his rebellious ways. So that's kind of the general vibe of the Jehovah's Witnesses around people who leave. But also, all high control groups.
Yep.
You'll even see in MLMs, I've watched a lot of ex-MLM content on YouTube, that people within MLMs will use the same narratives that religions will use. So they'll say, she just wasn't a good enough, she didn't have the right work ethic, or she just didn't do enough.
Wasn't fully committed.
Yeah.
I love when we stride into anti-MLM territory too, because they are predatory organizations that by their structure bank on most people failing. Should we read what Scientology wrote about Leah Remini?
Oh yeah. We can't not briefly touch on the Scientologists.
We should do a game that's like, who said it? Scientology, Jehovah's Witness.
Although they all have their little giveaways, don't they?
They do, their little
slightly
tells.
Different, yeah.
But it's so close. That's why it's so funny. And the origin stories are like all so close of this charming, charismatic leader who is also a sexual predator who also, it's like always the same story. So they wrote this about Leah Remini specifically. And I will hand it to the Scientologists. They are the king of cults.
They go hard.
Mormonism?
We're scared to even talk about them. That's why it's
Genuinely.
nestled among the JW slander.
I'll give the Mormons this, that at least they put on a front of being like wholesome and, passive aggressive at least these days.
It also
Scientology has like no problem being actual bullies.
And it seems like a big thing in cults, especially when it's like the founding leader is still alive, like with Keith Raniere with NXIVM. It seems like they throw their legal weight around in like really scary ways. Like we saw that in the NXIVM documentaries, how the NXIVM would just sue individual people who left and spoke out. They would sue them and defame them so aggressively, and they obviously had billions of dollars behind them because they had like those billionaire heiresses backing them and everything. That these regular people who just earn regular money, like their lives just get completely destroyed.
So thankful at least that we're dealing with somebody here that isn't as...
This is a video in which Mormonism does get a few points.
Yeah.
Because if I was an ex-Scientologist, I wouldn't be making a YouTube channel. I'll tell you that.
You'd be blacklisted in Hollywood, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It's crazy that they wrote this about a specific person.
So Leah Remini, just in case anyone doesn't know, she's a famous actress. She was in like King of Queens, was it? And she was raised a Scientologist, or like her mum converted when she was quite young. Essentially, she was raised in Scientology, was very believing, very devout, just as we were in Mormonism. And then she started to realize there were issues with leadership. Anyway, she unraveled the thread and realized the whole thing was just bullshit, and she wanted to leave. And then she started doing work to like spread awareness about the abuses of power that are happening in Scientology. Is really scary. And the documentary Going Clear was huge in our Mormon deconstruction.
Oh yeah, that was like
Chilling
the final
for both of
nail in
us,
the coffin for me.
It was really tough.
It was literally after watching that documentary, I closed my laptop and was just like, oh shit, I'm in a cult. Opened it, messaged my bishop, and was like, I can't be a secretary anymore.
That's what I'm saying about you need the peace. Not everyone does, but it's so helpful to see that piece of it and like how similar Mormon is to other. So this is a statement that the Church of Scientology put out about Leah Remini.
I just pulled this directly from their website. Leah Remini has become what she once declared she never wanted to be known as, this bitter ex-Scientologist.
Haven't we all?
People who leave are always so bitter.
Bitter is always a word that is used.
As USA Today wrote, Miss Remini is as famous for being an ex-Scientologist as she is as an actress. She needs to move on with her life instead of pathetically exploiting her former religion, her former friends, and other celebrities for money and attention
USA Today
to appear relevant again. No, this is them again.
Okay.
Sadly, bitterness and anger are common threads through Miss Remini's life. Miss Remini is showing herself to be a spoiled, entitled diva who still obsessively complains about such petty matters as her seating placement, limo ride, 5-star hotel accommodation, and the paparazzi's failure to recognize her nearly a decade ago. So they're just like, she is a messy bitch. It's crazy how just like the one, like an organization claiming to be like enlightenment embodied in an organizational structure, like the truth that will finally elevate humanity, can be so petty. It's mind-boggling.
It's wild to me that these people that are like self-declared enlightened people, part of these enlightened groups, will have that's a bitter, angry statement, right?
Yes.
And not that anger isn't a valid emotion and everything, but the fact that they're not even aware enough of what is generally considered to be like sort of the enlightenment experience of like, non-duality and love for everyone, and like they don't have like love and compassion and empathy as a part of their definition of enlightenment. It's so not. They so obviously aren't enlightened.
No, it's about
they're not
being
even trying to put on the
monetarily
front.
success so that you can pay more money to the organization.
They can't even glimpse enlightenment enough to pretend to be it.
Right.
Like they're just openly being what I would consider the exact opposite of enlightened.
Well, yeah, and they definitely have a different concept than like Buddhist enlightenment. It's pretty spooky. I watched back to back an interview with Gordon B. Hinckley and the only interview that David Miscavige has ever done, and the difference was so scary. Like, Hinckley's lying through his teeth, but at least he appears to be this charming old grandpa who, you're like, I still like him as a person.
Yeah.
Whereas David Miscavige was just like
sociopath.
Yeah. Scary.
As the second leader of a cult tends to be, kind of like Joseph Smith, Ron Hubbard. They probably both had the ability to connect with people and had empathy to some level, but then it seems like the person, or at
least are a diluted, there's
capable of at least masking as someone with empathy, whatever, who knows, but it seems like the person who wants to grab power after the founder of a cult dies just like always seems to be really sociopathic and doesn't even, like, Brigham Young didn't pretend to be love and light in any way, did he? But Joseph Smith, you could find more good quotes from Joseph Smith than Brigham Young.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It is amazing how that pattern is one that, like, plays out frequently, especially for the organizations that go more corporate and money-making versus just, like, pure power or whatever.
Yeah.
Control over individuals. Because you have this, like, a visionary who's also, like, manic and problematic, and and then they need someone who can turn it into a business, and it's those, like...
Every cult leader needs a second in command who will build their app for them, make their website, get the financials up and running.
And then when they die, it's run by sharks. So that was, Scientology, Jehovah's Witness. They all kind of... I love the painting always of the bitter, angry apostate.
I was going to say, and this leads perfectly into one of the most common narratives about ex-Mormons that is used to poison the well. In that statement about Leah Remini, they're basically attacking her. It's the Scientology version of she can leave but she can't leave it alone. Mm-hmm. So it's like the very fact that you're still talking about us, they paint it as like you're so obsessed with us, and that shows a weakness in your character for some reason, because obviously they can't legitimize the fact that people leave and have valid criticisms of the group. So it is necessary to just, as soon as you can, poison the well with members to make them think that, because in Mormonism there's very much the vibe of the way that like culture makes us speak. It's very much the vibe of God. I used to say that 2 years ago.
Apostasy is low-key goated.
In Mormonism, if believers see people who have left talking about the church and, criticizing it publicly after they leave, that is seen as a reason why they can't be trusted. Mm-hmm. Because in their mind, they
made covenants and then they broke them. Would an honorable person do that?
Yeah, because they have this idea that, like, because we can perfectly predict what happens when members leave, which isn't actually true because tons of people leave Mormonism and don't make YouTube channels, don't talk about it publicly. We get people on our channel all the time that were like, I left 20 years ago and I haven't really thought about this stuff for a couple of decades, and now I'm like unpacking it more watching your channel. Mm-hmm. So clearly, and I think especially the further back you go, I mean, It's just become like more acceptable and less terrifying, I think, to speak out. But when we first made our YouTube channel 7 years ago, it was not really happening. There weren't a lot of ex-Mormon YouTubers. I can only think of like Brother Jake doing YouTube videos. Mm-hmm. But there weren't just like personality YouTubers. You know?
We got in even before John Dehlin. You convinced John Dehlin to get on YouTube.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just a great way to poison the well. It's kind of like it's genius if you're writing a book of scripture that you're claiming is inspired to put in the scripture. Like, people are going to say that this scripture's bullshit, and that is how you'll know that this scripture isn't bullshit. Like, winning. Also,
doesn't it make you at all curious why everybody who leaves your organization is so bitter and angry? Like, maybe that's a you thing. Like, if every single person left a review at a restaurant that was like, this is horrible, I was maltreated here, wouldn't you be like, you're like, wow, everyone is just bitter and angry Yelp reviewers. It's like, or maybe there's a problem with your restaurant.
Well, the narrative that I certainly bought into Mormonism was because this church is true, it's the most persecuted. That's another thing. They all have persecution complexes. They all think they're the most persecuted. Mormons are not the most persecuted, obviously. But when you're in it, it feels like that because you do constantly brush up against people criticizing.
It's funny, in that David Miscavige thing, I might even have the clip, he even mentions the Mormons because he's like, there has never been any attempt to delegitimize religion like there is on Scientology. There's a war on us. They're trying to hurt us financially, and they're just da-da-da-da-da. And, this happened to the Mormons too, and now it's happening to us. And it's like, oh my God.
It's a bad time when you're looking to the Mormons to legitimize yourself.
Or worse, I've had Mormons recently on Twitter being like, as I've quoted things about from Leah Remini or whatever, they're like, she does sound like a bitter, angry apostate. And I'm like, when you have to find common ground with Scientology, that should make you take a good hard look in the mirror.
The ways that high demand religions will team up with each other, even though they hate each other.
Yeah, and they're like, you're going to hell, but we're Christians at the end of the day. But
evangelicals could not hate Mormons more. And then Mormons are like, we're all in this together.
Like, yes, we banned the gays together, and now the evangelicals are like, yeah, we're coming for you next.
And we'll ban the gays harder than you will.
Yeah, you think you'll have a place in the Marjorie Taylor Greene's theocracy? Yeah, fucking right.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? Oh, the Mormons thinking that they're on the side of the evangelicals with Trump is like, Jesus.
Also about the anger thing, it's funny how Mormonism specifically teaches you to suppress your anger, and the only allowance for it is righteous indignation. So the only time you can be angry in Mormonism if it's somebody who's doing something wicked. And
for example, to children. Like, for example, interviewing them behind closed doors about their sexuality.
Maybe that's something we could...
But then the person, Sam Young, who did that activist work, was excommunicated, wasn't he?
Yeah, I feel like I'm in just Crazyville where I'm like, they're passing laws about drag and having references to homosexuality in books, just as like an orientation. They're banning them from schools and stuff, and it's like, what was it, like 40 people arrested recently in child abuse or child pornography cases? Among them, like, a ton of pastors and preachers, among them a police officer, not a single drag queen. And, the Utah legislature is shooting down measures that would require clergy to report child sex abuse. But instead they're like, no, we would hate for that to happen. We would just prefer to tell abusers to please stop. It's like, it's crazy. And this is why religion collectively in general, I think, is so harmful and an ultimate detriment to us as people, is because it ends up getting us up in arms about tiny things that do not matter, like coffee or your sexual orientation, while totally, as Jesus said, neglecting the weightier matters of the law, like the actual safety of children.
It's blowing my mind that drag queens have become such a symbol for political divide, because I'm like, it's so small.
Right.
There's not that many drag queens. It might be kind of a popular art form right now. But so what? So are music videos, and those aren't in line with what you think is right either, but you're not trying to make those illegal. It's just so weird.
No, it's absolutely
such a tiny...
The bizarrity that so many of those legislatures have done drag. It's absolutely
so strange.
Mind-boggling.
So strange. Also, yeah, it's just really weird, because everyone loves Mrs. Doubtfire, first of all. And
Tootsie?
Just the thought of drag, I can't fathom drag being illegal. Just because it's so... How do you...
It is illegal. In Tennessee, they can't perform Les Miserables because somebody cross-dresses in the storyline.
Whoa. Well, they wouldn't want to teach about the French Revolution in Tennessee, I'm sure.
Oh, well, we could go on and on about.
We digress.
So, yeah, myth, I'd say that's the biggest myth that we often hear from Mormons is they can leave the church, but they can't leave it alone.
Which is a sign that they secretly, deep down, know that it's true.
Yep.
Not that their criticisms are valid. This is what I find so ridiculous, is I'm like, if I put my little Mormon apologist hat on, it should be obvious to them that ex-Mormons at least believe what they're saying. Like, I think the smartest strategy, if you're a Mormon apologist, should be to say, these people really believe this, but they're wrong. Like, we think we're right, but they can't even acknowledge that, because it's literally, and that is so telling, that it's too threatening to even acknowledge that people are sincere in their criticisms or in their issues. Like, they have to take it to another layer of delusion. They can't just say, well, Tanner and Sam, like, they probably really believe all the shit that they're talking about because they've been doing it for so many years and they seem genuine and passionate about it. No, they have to think that we're actually lying about our motives. They can't just be like, you're wrong.
Right.
Which I'm like, we can acknowledge, like, we don't think believing Mormons are right in their beliefs, but we can acknowledge that they believe them.
Yes.
Like, there shouldn't be a need to...
literally demonize.
Yeah, literally just recast what is so obviously true. You know?
Like, I don't have to believe that you are a bad person for believing this. I don't have to believe that you are falling victim to a satanic plot or that you yourself are being duplicitous or something.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't think that you've been exposed to all the information, and as an act of compassion, I want to share that with you, and just talk about my own experiences, because this whole thing is, like, so absurd, because Mormonism, they're like, this is the most important thing in the world, so important, we have to share it with all our friends and family, we got to go on a mission for 2 years so that we can share the message because it's the most important thing, but we're the only ones who are allowed to talk about it, and even though you committed your whole life and thousands of dollars and whatever it is, went on the mission and did the whole works and went to BYU and got married in the temple and did all the things, you're not allowed to talk about it if you're not in my little group. Like, that is crazy. People should be allowed to talk about their experiences anytime, no matter what. Like, you didn't sign an NDA at baptism.
Although, they should consider that.
They really should.
I'm surprised that hasn't been on the table yet. This kind of leads us on to the next one that we hear a lot and that we see a lot in our comment section from Mormons, which is... you never really had a testimony, or you never really believed, or you can tell these guys never really got it, which I find absurd. I mean, I was a convert who's in it for 5 years, so I'm like, maybe you could find a kid. I mean, I was super zealous and I truly believed, but I'm like, you were AP on your mission. You had a callings that were like higher than anyone else in college had. Like, you were obsessed. Truly. If not me, if you can't believe it in me because I'm a convert, then let me tell you, Tanner, there was no one more Mormon than Tanner.
And I feel like I have to give a disclaimer every single video to encapsulate that, because people watch us and they're like, oh, these people are just bitter, angry people who criticize every experience they have, that were always looking at the negative, who are just trying to find fault in every little thing. And it's like, while we were in it, we were not like that. We were like every other Mormon who just was conditioned to sit down, shut up, keep sweet, pray, and obey. Okay, we sustained our leaders, we did a service with a smile on our face, and we were happy to in a lot of circumstances, because that's how we were conditioned to be. We had the full experience. Like, don't get me wrong. All cults and high demand religions give you one hell of an emotional experience. Like, it's a good time at points. Depending on who you are.
We happen to fit in well with the system, so it worked well for us. And we've been upfront about that. Like, I always, when I talk about BYU Idaho, I say I had a good time while I was there. Now I look back and I'm like, that's chilling. I didn't know any better. But we've not been people that sit here and whine about how we had a terrible time in Mormonism.
Right.
Like, we kind of both thrived in it in a lot of ways, I think, because again, we fit the culture in ways that were advantageous.
It's like, an abusive marriage. It's like, I'm sure when they started the marriage, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to get into an abusive marriage and stick it out for 17 years because I'm a bimbo and a glutton for punishment. It's like, you go in with good feelings to some degree, or you wouldn't do it. And then those patterns manifest over time, and then once a person is able to leave and actually unpack all that without the hope that it's all gonna make sense and that finally they'll fall in love and finally their husband will be a good person or whatever, it's like you unpack all that and you start like, whoa, I was coerced into doing things that I didn't want to do and manipulated to do things that I didn't want to do that were came at great personal cost to me and that were ultimately bad for my health under false pretenses. Information was kept from me intentionally. And so, and other people who are not me, because, I'm like a white guy. The church works for me. But and this is a thing that I've noticed, is that Mormons and other high demand religions are not able to, of course, we already said it, like validate the experience of people leaving. But you can't, it's like, I've had a great time in the church. What do you mean the church was bad for you? I've only had good things. And it's like, yeah, because it works for you. But you have to admit that, like, there's people it doesn't work for and people who do get really hurt by it. And you're not even allowed to be like, oh, I'm sorry, and as an act of Christian grace say, hey, tell me about your experiences. I would love to hear, like, what happened to you, because I want to be a part of the group that is trying to make things better for everybody. But it's not like that. It's like, oh, no, get out of here. If you have a grievance to air, do it somewhere else. Or actually, don't do it at all. Just shut up, get out of here. Talk about it with your therapist.
Do you know what's wild? So I do faith transitions coaching, and I would say 75% or the majority of my clients, they told their families they were leaving the church, and they said their families have just never asked them about it. They've never asked why. It's just, just become this weird thing that, like, they
don't want to know.
They don't want to know, which again is so telling. Like, number one, you're you're assuming motives that aren't there in ex-Mormons, and you're assuming that they're dishonest in, what they're saying publicly about why they left, but then you are literally refusing to hear why they left.
And I brought this up recently, but will again, because I just think it's so ironic that the church they realize that they can't get away with outright lying about the seer stone and the gold plates and all the other things. They have to come forward with some information, and they literally officially refer to that process as inoculation. That is to say, they view the truth as a deadly disease that people have to be given minuscule amounts of so that they can know how to fight it, so their bodies can learn to resist truth. What a weird metaphor to use. But that's so real. Like, the Mormon paradigm is this house of cards that can come crumbling down at any single moment. And so they have to maintain that paranoia. They can't be curious. But that was our downfall, because we were like, well, if we have the truth, it can't be harmed by investigation. That's Jerry Rubin Clark, right? And so we were like, of course the truth will be on my side. That's what I thought. I was like, I'll read about stuff and I'll find you the answers, because it's going to make sense, because this is true. So what do I have to be afraid of? Turns out a lot.
Quite a bit. I do think that, especially in 2023, especially today, when so many people are leaving that Mormons thought would never leave, the very elect are being deceived. That's such a convenient teaching to have. I think they have to believe that people who leave didn't do something right or didn't do good enough, because that gives them like a false sense of security. Because as a Mormon, it is something you think about, like, people sure seem to be led astray, and that was even 7 years ago when you saw it happening less publicly. But you'd kind of think about that. You'd be like, am I immune? Because you're constantly getting barraged with teachings about how you need to safeguard yourself from anti-Mormon literature and teachings that are contrary of the church and being seduced by culture and all that. So you do think about it, like, am I strong enough to withstand that? And you're like, yeah, totally, because you read your scriptures every day and you do all the things. But I think it provides like this false security blanket for Mormons to think that, to not find out why people leave and just think, well, they probably just didn't do a good enough job. So they were vulnerable. But the truth is, well, I wouldn't say everyone's vulnerable, because it does seem like some people have been so thoroughly brainwashed that it's like pretty statistically unlikely that they'll have the right kind of exposure that would, like, their psyches would just never allow it, basically. I do think that those people exist, but I do think obviously a lot more people in Mormonism are vulnerable to losing their faith than they know, because you don't know what you don't know. And
we even had recently the prophet of the LDS Church calling people who leave lazy learners, like, they just didn't put in the work to really figure it out. And that's something I see on Twitter all the time, is people being like, and in our comment section, like, they don't understand. They're just taking little things and then making some mountain out of this molehill because they didn't understand or make the effort to understand. And it's like, on the one hand, you're telling people that the gospel is so simple a child should be able to explain and understand it. And on the other hand, that you require 7 decades of diligent, unending labor and study in order to wrap your head around these concepts.
And that people like us can be consuming church-approved media, you know, the scriptures, general conference talks, praying, can be doing that stuff for hours a day, and it's not enough because of some weakness in them, you know?
It's always that fault. And it's funny, we have a friend whose dad, now 69 years old, is just leaving the church, and a statement that he said was, like, you know, they tell you that if you put in the work, it'll make you happier. And it doesn't. And that's a person who's had a whole life looking back and being like, yeah, after a whole lifetime of study and defending and enthusiastic participation, it is not paid out in the way that was promised. And it doesn't just make sense eventually if you just keep putting every single doubt you have on the shelf.
Yeah, we talked about that in our Being Mormon in 2023 video, but I do feel like part of the reason we had a good experience in the church is because we were young. You know, like being in college is fun.
Yeah.
And so going to devotional with like your friends is like, there's just something, there's a lot of like fun community. You've got your whole life ahead of you. You haven't really faced the grim reality or like the monotony of adult life yet. Like even just, obviously didn't have kids or anything, but even being married for just like a month, I could already start to see like, I was just staring down the barrel of like just a boring, like joyless life that just felt so stale. And I was like, I guess I've just got to do this forever and then work up the courage to have kids at some point, and that, you know, just...
Yeah, we had fun because we're fun people.
Yes.
Looking back, I'm like, I can't believe I spent my twink years on a Mormon mission.
Your twink years are not over though. You've got 10 left in you at least. So you're good.
Inevitable.
God blessed you that
twink
way.
death of the universe.
Another narrative that is so frustrating is there are things that are close to universal experiences in Mormonism that people will try to be like, oh, that's just an experience you had. But in my ward, it wasn't like that at all. And it's like, great, your ward wasn't like that. But that was like, for thousands of people in our comment section or on Instagram DMing us, like that was their experience. This is a pretty... And even they who are making the comments must know that, you know. But people will so often... They'll accuse us of being like, oh, you must have just had a bad experience, but I didn't personally, when that isn't our truth at all. We had a nice time.
I didn't get abused by my bishop.
Yeah.
The doctrine that we should always defer to leaders and whatever didn't negatively impact me in that way, so it must not be real.
But then they'll use like their random isolated, ward that's different from the rest for some reason. Like the people in that ward just happen to be more chill about, let's say, sexual purity or just something. And then they almost try to cast the whole church in that light. And it's you can't just like pick and choose, We got to go off mainstream teachings here and what the church itself is teaching. But yeah, that's kind of another narrative, is just this idea that there's some other way you should have understood things. Even when...
And they can never offer it, by the way. It's always like, if you would just put in more work and effort, it would make sense, because it makes sense to me. It's like, okay, well then explain it to me.
I too have grappled with all these issues, but I found resolution and peace, and it made my testimony stronger.
This actually makes my testimony even stronger.
I love that one.
Knowing that Joseph Smith was a sexual predator actually strengthens my testimony, because it means God calls imperfect people, and I just love that.
Yes. Seriously, it's like we are talking about child grooming. We're not talking about, someone who is like ugly. From apologists as well, there's that very haughty attitude of like, if you only would have done this very niche mental gymnastics that even the church itself is not teaching, that's just what we found to resolve it. If you would have only just done that, the sensible thing, then you wouldn't have landed in this bitter delusional place.
If you would have scoured the archives to find the 1963 edition of The Friend, I think you would have not had so much doubt about this, because you think the church is hiding from you, but they actually did make a passing reference to it in that Ensign article.
I can't stand because number one, it's not just about the fact that the church hid certain things. So even if you can find a passing reference to it in, like random...
They did then hid.
It's the fact that they actually did the things as well. Like, we're just talking about one piece of it. Like, you can't make it go away by saying that. I feel like we're getting into, like, apologetics narratives, which are a whole other infuriating thing, but also hilarious. And also... I never stop thinking about how grateful I am to not have to be a Mormon apologist.
Oh, yeah.
It was the worst time. The time period where you know too much, so you have to start adopting apologetics.
Uh-huh.
It's so much better before the fall. But becoming a Mormon apologist, I'm like, they've surely got to be the most miserable people in the church. Sweeping generalization, probably. Can't be substantiated,
well, they've also, some of them, they've got a community of people who, feel like the luminaries of Mormonism who are bringing the answers. And, it's funny, I've seen this video going around of a BYU professor, somebody Halverson. In fact, my dad just sent me his talk where he's like, I work with people, my job is to work with people who are experiencing doubt. And, I'm investigating, like, why are people, I talk with Jews who experience anti-Semitism, and I've talked with Mormons who are experiencing anti-Mormonism, and it's like, okay, those are
the same.
completely different things, first of all. And he's like, and he does go in with this mentality of like, wherever you're at, I'll meet you there. Like, even if you don't believe in God, that's okay. Like, I can meet you there.
Also, can I just say, people aren't leaving Judaism because of anti-Semitism.
I know.
They are also leaving for doctrinal or, value-based reasons.
And Judaism is an ethnicity, so you don't really leave it. Like, you can be like an Orthodox practitioner or just Jew by inheritance. Like, it has heritage. I mean, so it's
also pretty well established that persecution makes people double down in their religious beliefs. So just this idea that people leave Mormonism because everyone just talks so much shit on Mormons is like not really true. That's more likely to make people be more Mormon.
Mm-hmm. Well, the sum of the talk is essentially like a faith crisis can actually be a good thing because, we've got the creation, we've got the fall, and the fall looks like it's game over, but that's just set up so that people can be redeemed and atoned at the end.
The totally logical fall that we all think makes so much sense.
Yeah, and, I've seen that going around, and it makes sense that in Mormon culture, they're having to grapple with people leaving people they love and not being able to just go to the traditional narratives of they're awful, we have to shun them. People want to see their family and they want to see their kids. And so they need a new narrative that's like, oh, they're not damned and going to hell. It's they are going to come back eventually. The divine tentacles of providence will reach after them, as Joseph Smith says.
Because also that narrative of like a faith crisis can be a good thing actually, which is an advancement, is really just a softer version of like they just didn't understand things quite right.
Yes.
And so because it's a good thing, it's a good thing because it means it should ultimately make you more Mormon in the end. And because it hasn't, then clearly they haven't reached the ultimate truthful conclusion. They're just deluded. So it is just like a repackaged version of they're deceived, they're deluded. But it is kinder, so that's better.
And it is interesting when people who haven't experienced something presume to understand the trajectory of someone who has. So it's like, oh, that faith crisis will ultimately serve to make them stronger in the church.
You have it then.
That's what I'm... Yeah, right?
I'm inside here, I dare you.
Okay, well then I assume that means that you're willing to understand these things and grapple with them. Or unless you're not following the trajectory, and if you're not following the trajectory, it doesn't mean there's like two different kinds of arcs happening here. Does God really have an individual plan for everybody? I think I might respond talking about the hero's journey and the, dark night of the soul, the spiritual death, and then the rebirth, and then also maybe Fowler stages of faith, where the faith crisis is seen as an important step of intellectual and spiritual progression, and then a reintegration of myths and things in life. But it's just so funny how people who haven't experienced that are like, oh, I know exactly, this is exactly how it's supposed to play, and it's like, then why isn't it playing that way out for you? Like, does that mean you're not progressing? Because you're still in those first one or two phases. Yeah. With more to follow.
And so many people in Mormonism will say, they went through a faith crisis or they left the church and they came back, and it just is not this. It just isn't the same. They haven't experienced the same thing.
You didn't understand enough. You didn't try hard enough to become a good ex-Mormon.
Yeah, and obviously there's so many factors at play, of like some people's like lack of being able to feel stable or safe without the religious community that they're familiar with is going to be bigger than others. Not that it feels particularly good for many people, but...
And there is a dark night of the soul that comes often when leaving the church, because it is set up to be your primary sense of identity and purpose and community, and that is very, very hard to lose. Like you said, it goes against our evolutionary wiring, and there is something like a grief that comes with that was for me like unlike anything I'd ever experienced, like a true night of the soul, a true spiritual death.
Literally,
that has
like
ultimately
I have
come to serve me so
nothing to live for. It's just interesting being an animal that has become conscious enough to now need to figure out its reasons for continuing to live. Like it's pretty scary to be.
Yeah, especially when you're from an organization that has intentionally tried to cripple you from being able to survive in the real world and to grapple with real issues.
And when you spent years literally thinking, if I ever realized the church wasn't true, I'd kill myself, because like they literally teach you to have nothing to live for without it.
On the mission, I said I would become a JW because they're committed.
That's beautiful. I know we've talked about this a lot, but it is just worth pointing out once again, just for anyone who's new to, I don't know, the ex-Mormon world. It's very frustrating having people who have not experienced what you have experienced trying to tell you like your reasons for doing things, or you know, speaking publicly, like these leaders that get up in general conference who have never had a significant departure from the church in any way, saying here's why ex-Mormons are leaving, or here's the deal with apostates, trying to describe a situation they've never gone through, that they, according to my convenience sample data, are unwilling to ask people about, to even find out, you know, it's not like they're even doing the work to, you'd think that they would want to know everything they could about why people are leaving.
Oh yeah.
But they're scared, and they know that it's too threatening.
Because they don't want to know. They don't want to catch the disease germs.
Exactly. It's all coming back to the fact that any group where it is literally threatening to your perceived identity to feel empathy for people not in the group.
Scary.
So scary. To where you literally, your brain is wired as such that you feel like your survival is threatened by having too much empathy for, because obviously there are members who do have empathy for people who leave and who would say they do,
at least
and
compassion.
Totally, and there are members who do ask, but does seem to be a pretty frequent experience of ex-Mormons that their loved ones don't want to know. They won't ask them about it because they don't feel safe hearing it.
And there's an unconscious part that knows that they are not equipped to deal with real concerns. It's also so wild to be ex-Mormon and see members like using tactics on you that obviously you know about, and it's like they seem to completely forget that you were Mormon, because again they have this narrative that you weren't a good Mormon and you didn't do it right. It's like they suddenly forget that, like, you know the whole playbook. Like, you lived by it too. So it's not going to work. It's not a two-way street in terms of understanding. Obviously, the person it's kind of like the comment we always get of, oh, it's so fucked up. People don't say fucked up, but, like, it's so wrong to make fun of a religion. It's like, it was literally our own religion. Yeah.
If you can't make fun of yourself.
That's what people say all the time. I would love to see you make these kind of lighthearted jokes about Islam and see it. And it's like, we weren't Muslim. Yeah. And you can find ex-Muslim channels and Twitter accounts. Yeah. They're out there doing the exact same thing. And we do.
Yeah.
Because problem is problem, and we should all be trying to resolve the problems of the cultures and groups that we find ourselves in.
And it would be kind of weird if an ex-Muslim focused their attentions on Mormons. It's like, just talk about what you know. I mean, that's the whole point of all of this, right? It's just people sharing and forming community after leaving a high-demand community.
I had a close personal friend say to me, like, it's not an outsider's place to talk about what happens and I was like,
thousands of dollars, 2 years of your life, thousands of unpaid hours of labor.
And I'm like, I'm still living in a state run by Mormonism that is entrenched in Mormon culture, and people are like, we'll just leave. I don't want to fucking leave. It's a fucking free country.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be in a place where like theocracy is the system. Like, I don't want that, and I can assert that, and that doesn't mean I have to just like leave.
It's also
I have as much right to be here as anybody, and that's still like, sorry, go ahead.
No, I hate that, because even if you maybe could drum up the resources to leave, it just completely neglects the fact that it is expensive to leave. For some people, they cannot leave because of their job or children. You know, there's just so many reasons why people can't just up and move their whole lives. And to be willing to, you know, tell people to do that before you're willing to look at creating a more tolerant society.
Yeah.
Because ex-Mormons aren't trying to say, like, make being Mormon illegal, you know, burn down their buildings. We're just trying to say, like, lessen the abuses of power.
Yes. And to be told that, like, by a family member and friend and being like, oh, suddenly I don't get a voice at the table just because my name isn't on some, in some archive somewhere. Like, that's absurd.
Love that all-encompassing love for every one of your neighbors.
What about all that, like, the going after the 90 and 9, like, or leaving the 90 and 9 to go after the 1, like, that attitude is just, like, it's always so misapplied. It's like, oh, the person who isn't showing up to meetings, we need to go love bomb them, and not like, oh, I should show some empathetic curiosity, some compassionate curiosity to someone who I perceive as obviously having a very difficult spiritual time, or like, yeah.
Jesus' whole thing was going and hanging out with the people that were not accepted by society. It's pretty clear, you know?
This organization is pro at turning the teachings of Jesus Christ on its head. I think it's so funny when people get on here and they comment, for instance, about us being part of the great and spacious building that is pointing at the believers at the tree of life. And it's like, you think ex-Mormons are the one with the great and spacious building? Who owns most of the real estate downtown? The biggest and most spacious of the buildings. And as its whole schema is about building great and spacious buildings to make fun of and dehumanize and demonize the people who are leaving, versus the people who are like, hey, listen, I found my reason to live and my spiritual essence and my morality, and I listen to my internal voice. Like, those are the people who have found it.
Don't you think projection is so wild? And just the thing of, like, people becoming what they constantly criticize. Like, just, like, it's so obvious that Mormonism's constantly talking about great and spacious building, and they're literally known for their great and spacious buildings that cost billions of dollars, that they build in areas where, you know, people can't afford food. Also, while they're taking 10% of money from people while doing, like, illegal shell companies.
Did you see?
Yes.
Oh my
gold
God!
Fillings.
Yes.
Tell them.
Quote that's been going around from President Faust, a former member of the first presidency, who was encouraging members in, like, Argentina or Chile somewhere to donate the gold from their teeth to adorn the temple. They were, like, encouraging them to do that, and Faust bought a bunch of their gold teeth as a way of being like, see, the members are so faithful, they'll even give us their goddamn teeth.
The same year that the church approved the fraudulent shell companies to hide how much tithing money they had, which their representative said one of the reasons they did that was because they didn't want the members to know how much money they had, because then they wouldn't pay tithing. Your fucking fillings in your teeth, you'd be in agony for a start. You're just condemning yourself to a life of pain, physical pain that they do not need. And he's just going to use it as some, like, little prop.
Like,
it's not going in the temple, the gold fillings.
This is why I'm so adamant about doing the name substitutions, like how we do the Kevin test. It's like, find out if God is an idiot by changing his name to Kevin. And if you can't tolerate Kevin, then you should get a new God. Because it's when we are raised from birth to perceive things as normal, like, that is our sense of morality and normalcy. We all are biased to think the things that we're familiar with are good, even though they may be horrifically bad to somebody else or from, like, a more objective standpoint. And so I always encourage members to, like, okay, if a different organization was doing this, which is why we read quotes from J-Dubs and Scientologists, like, is it okay when they do it? No, right? Then why is it okay when you do it? And that whole thing, what were we just talking about? I'm so sorry.
The gold fillings.
The gold fillings. It's like, at what point would you consider it like a parasitic practice of a different organization? If they were asking people for their kidneys, would that be too much of an ask for the Catholic Church to be like, yeah, you need to give us your teeth? And if it's too much for the Catholic Church, then why isn't it too much for your church? And it's like, well, because we're the one true one, and we're doing cult. We're doing cult because we're allowed, and everyone else is just imposters who shouldn't be allowed to do the cult thing.
Also, asking members in third world countries for their fillings, there's something like sick and twisted about that to me. Almost like how much can we make these poor people, knowing that you do not need it, knowing that you do not need the gold fillings? Because also, it's like, members in America aren't going to give away their fillings and then just have holes in their teeth. They would never suffer that much for the church. There's something so sick about it, knowing full it.
And they would never ask the members to do it.
I'm like, what is the phrase? It's not like poverty porn, but it's like something in that weird world you're getting like a rise out of like how much will these desperate people give to this organization that I am a leader in.
Yes.
So gross.
Well, it's like the dark ulterior side of prosperity gospel of the like, wow, they'll just do anything and the Lord is going to bless them. It's weird. It's very weird.
And also, like, they have so little that the best they can do is just give even the fillings in their teeth to us. Because, like, we are the best thing in their lives. They have nothing. It's like, well, probably not having tooth pain every day is, like, the most valuable thing. Honestly, that's, like, one of the worst experiences. So, speaking of money, I feel like we should briefly touch on this idea that we just saw going around Twitter.
I've got the tweet right here.
Yesterday, we'll read you the tweet. Because we have things to say about this.
At LDS Mormon, who said, just be aware there are some ex-Mos making a lot of money teaching against the church, but it's an old tactic. Moses 5:3-1, and Cain said, truly I am Mahan, the master of this great secret, that I may murder and get gain. Alma 35:53. I taught them until I had much success. I know. I'm like, oh, sorry. How did you equate murder with people getting paid to talk about?
We're making videos about veganism. Yeah.
And it's like the whole comment section is people being like, you come to like right when the church gets fined for hiding billions of dollars.
If you want to talk about fucking murdering to get gain, I would say asking people in impoverished countries to give 10% of their income when they cannot feed their children or afford healthcare or anything, that is murdering for your own gain.
It's truly
while deliberately hiding your money.
So that they don't get wise and stop paying for things they can't afford. Crazy that they would associate it with murder, that just like sharing your experience or, doing like what we're doing here is equivalent to murder. Also quoting a completely bunk book. It's so funny to The Pearl of Great Price. It's just hilarious. And it's like, we are literally just making content that people can choose to follow or support of their own volition. We don't even have to threaten people with burning alive at the last day or to separate them from their eternal families or forfeit your real estate in heaven. Like, we're just like, if you want to support us, do it. That easy. Whereas the church is like, do it even if you can't afford to it. Do it or you will burn alive when Jesus comes back to collect his $100 billion.
And because of everything you just said, it really wouldn't matter how much money we made, because we're not exploiting people to get it. You know, we're not forcing. No one's obliged to do anything. But the fact of the matter is, content creation, ex-Mormon content creation, is not the cash cow that these people seem to think it is. It is somewhat easy.
If you've got a cash cow idea for us, let us know, please. We'll switch gears.
Also, buy our merch. So, I'd say the ex-Mormon content space is way more saturated now than when we got into it. Like, if we would have got into the game now, we maybe would be nobodies. Yeah. So it is harder. But, like, while it may be somewhat easy to build sort of an ex-Mormon following in this space, just because there is such a need for ex-Mormon content and for community and for hearing different people's voices and experiences, and that is something that has only become like a thing like in the last like 7 or so years, because again, when we first did YouTube, I couldn't have named another ex-Mormon YouTuber. Like, again, they probably were a handful that existed, but it just wasn't so much of a thing, and now everyone leaves the church and starts a YouTube channel. But there's such a demand for that kind of content and those voices. So, like, yeah, you might be able to, like, get a little bit of clout by having a bit of a following. You have to be consistent, though, and, like, you know, you have to put a lot of work in, I'd say, especially now, to really get anywhere. And as for money, I'm like, we've been doing this for 7 years, like, making essentially $0 for a lot of that time, or for some of those years. And we still, like, don't... Like, I make half what I made in my tech job doing this.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't have health insurance. It's pretty, like, touch and go, like, paying bills every month. It's certainly not a cash cow. And when I think about... And obviously there's people bigger than us that make more money than us. Like, Mormon Stories, I imagine, is probably the channel that makes the most money.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
John has been doing that for 17 years. John is the biggest workaholic I know. He does 100-hour weeks. He's just done 100-hour weeks for, like, the majority of its existence. He's provided enormous value to people. Again, his whole thing is donation-based. So people are choosing to give him their money because they are finding value in his work. And so I'm like, you can't fault him for it.
Yeah.
Like people making money, providing value to people who want to give them money is like a pretty clean system, you know. As much as like YouTube is probably owned by evil people, you know. There's always no ethical consumption, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, like it or not, you have to admit that it is work, and we do put out a lot of it. And when I think it's so funny when people are like, oh, you made ex-Mormonism your whole personality. No,
we only film on Tuesdays. We'd be richer if we did make it our whole personality.
I guarantee you I have a lot more multiplicity of interests and passions than you do, but...
And obviously if you see... And some people do make ex-Mormonism their whole personality. Like John DeLynn, I'd be like, it's pretty much his whole personality, and I think he would own that. And I think that's fine. You know, it's like Jane Goodall made chimps, apes. Yeah. That was her whole thing. There's nothing wrong with having a thing that you're passionate about, and that's kind of what you devote your time to.
Right.
I think we are people who like do better in life having like a wider variety of things we're into, and that's why we only film on Tuesdays normally, and why... You realistically won't catch us at a party talking about ex-Mormonism with each other. But I think obviously when you look at people online and you see that this is what we're known for, this is what we put online, it can seem like, you know, that's their whole thing. But it's not. Yeah. It's like, it's one of our jobs that we have. It's like our primary thing. We do believe in the cause. We care about the cause. Every time we try and move away from it, it sucks us back in because we do care. And it's, you know, I think all of us in life just have to do whatever we can to sort of like try and make a little corner of the world better in whatever ways we can. This is just the thing we have experience in. People seem to enjoy us talking on camera, so it just makes sense. But yeah, what I'm saying is it's not true for us that it's our whole personality, but even if it was, that would be okay. There's nothing wrong with that. No. And if you want to talk about making some things your whole personality, let's look at Mormonism. Because it not only is it your whole personality, you are literally psychologically dependent on it and feel like your life wouldn't be worth living without it. So I'd say that's a little bit more extreme than making a lot of YouTube videos.
Totally. I was just thinking about that. Heather Gay posted a shirt that she is now selling that was like, Bad Mormon or something.
Bad Mormon just came into the library, so I have to go get it today. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Is it her memoir?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, I was on the wait list for weeks.
Oh, that's fun. Well, some Mormon... got a bunch of retweets being like, wow, some people leave the church and make it their whole personality. And literally in her bio, it's like, LDS mom loves Dr. Pepper. And it's like, oh, so you just made LDS and Dr. Pepper your whole personality? Whoa. And
you're gunning for the Coca-Cola company in your bio?
Like, this is more of an indictment of you for reducing people... to a single tweet or a single piece of merchandise as their whole thing. And crazy that you can't see the irony of encouraging people to make their whole personality the church, because there's that quote from like David A. Bednar where he's like, the church should inform every decision you make, every relationship that you have, the things that you wear, the places you go, what you decide to do, the things that you say, the things that you eat. Like, they do want to infiltrate every single aspect of your life. And so then to be like, oh, you can make the church your whole personality, but the second you do one thing to talk about it publicly, you've made that your whole personality, and that's so shameful and stupid. It's like, grow the fuck up. And if you saw a person leaving Scientology like Leah Remini and see her talking about the abuses that happen there and the manipulation and coercion and all that, wouldn't you be like, yeah, I'm glad she's doing that? And but you can't have that same compassion for people who have been hurt or for are raising awareness about actual issues. And it's not like we're here just like being like peddling rumors and things. Like, we're talking about actual history and real experiences by real people. And that should
it's not our fault our music hasn't taken off enough for that to be our main thing. It's not through lack of trying. So yeah, I feel like this just brings us full circle back to just, there's no legitimate reason to leave. And it doesn't matter what's true. All that matters is just figuring out a way to self-soothe within the high control group when it comes to people who leave, because disaffected members of the group are the most threatening thing. So there have to be self-soothing narratives. And like, yeah, it's wild to have people in our comment section trying to tell us what they think our truth is, when it's like, you do, like, we're in our own heads. So like, you can't you're not going to be able to convince us that your truth about us is more true than what we know to be true in our own lives and heads. Like, that's just absurd. But it is just self-soothing. It is just about them. It's not about us. It doesn't matter what we say or what we do. Like, they will, you know, you can talk too much about, there's never a legitimate reason. There's never an acceptable reason to speak out. It's just all what it is.
I will say there is one thing that is true, and that it is we have lost the light in our eyes. Can't you tell? Of course, it has nothing to do with leaving Mormonism. It's because we don't eat enough carrots.
Yeah, we are bad
give
on
you
the
that
beta-carotene.
sparkle.
Yeah.
It's crazy when people will comment on the light in somebody's eyes or how their countenance seems so. And it's like, you're just judging someone's appearance. Like,
that's why for most of this channel, I've worn so much highlighter. I'm like, you're not going to get me on that.
They're like, wow, he's getting gray hair now. It must be the stress of... And it's like, or I just... like... abandoning God and kicking against the pricks. It's like, well, you're certainly being a prick.
God's getting his revenge by making you hotter and cooler. I hate when that happens. Well, I think this has been a long video, and we've probably covered sort of our main bases here.
Myth busted.
Do you think we've busted these myths?
All right, your silence says everything I need to hear. No answer is an answer. Just like in the Mormon church when you pray to know if the Book of Mormon is true. If
you want to join us for more of a fun vibe, go over to our Patreon and we'll be reading Stephanie there.
You can watch it for like $1. I think will pop up saying a suggested amount, but you don't have to do that.
We only have the suggested donation there because it seems to encourage people to pledge higher donations, which obviously we would like because we want to be able to pay our bills. But yeah, you can pledge $1 a month and get access to everything. Also, if you found this video valuable and you want to support the channel, you can also do it via PayPal. You can make a one-time donation there, and we also have Venmo, and that's in the bio. And we also have merch, and we also have a candle, and that's all of our clout and money chasing.
All right, love you so much.
Love you, bye.
Bye.